All right, so good morning. Today we're going to kind of cover some of our speed training concepts, some of the benefits of speed training, kind of how, when, and why we program these, and kind of some of the ways that we can implement them, specifically in my case with baseball, but really with any of your team sports or even some of your track and field. So first off, kind of covering why is sprinting important? What are some of the benefits of sprint training, and how do we see how it can improve any of our athletic development? So first off, it's pretty high CNS development exercise, probably one of the highest of anything that you're going to do, whether it's weight room or on-field activity. It's going to train those fast twitch muscle fiber recruitment, so it has high rate of force development. It's going to translate directly to their on-field performance slash athleticism. That's kind of one of the biggest things that I preach to our coaching staff. A lot of times we get really wrapped up on what we're doing in the weight room, whenever really in fact they're not going to have a barbell in their hands in the weight on the field. They're not going to have dumbbells on the field. So a lot of times taking things like plyometrics and sprinting that really translate to what they're going to have to do on the field is really big in my programming, and I think it's kind of gained popularity over the last 2 to 5 years. It develops athleticism at a high level. It reduces risk of injuries, specifically hamstring, posterior chain injuries. It increases, your inner and intramuscular coordination and rhythm. It's easy to measure. And last but not least, probably one of my favorite parts about it is it creates competition with all of our athletes. Easy to measure. You can put a number with it, and it creates a ton of competition. So that's a huge piece of our program with baseball here. And I know it also is included in some of the soccer program, volleyball program with over there with what they're doing at Shira. So, what do your athletes need? The biggest tip I can give is to watch the athlete, not the sport. That's a quote from Charlie Francis. So, whenever you sit down to really think about how you're going to program, energy system, but mainly speed training, watch their sport, watch how the athlete moves. Don't guess. Just really sit down, pick one athlete on the field, analyze how they move, what they go through during a match, and then kind of work backwards from there. Kind of going over some of the energy systems, and Victor's much better with this than I am, but just kind of to briefly hit on them. We have first off, you have your alactic system, which is your ATP CP. It's going to be 10 to 12 seconds of high intensity activity. That would be power cleans, it would be your sled pushes, your short sprints, anything that's going to be really fast twitch, really high burst acceleration for a short period of time. Next, you have your lactic. I'd say this is probably the least utilized, in most of your field sports specifically. Track and field is going to be a little bit different, obviously, with your 400, your 800, some of those other events, but it's going to be 30 to 90 seconds of high intensity activity with 6 to 8 minutes rest. So again, if you look at that work to rest ratio, you don't really see that in many sports, specifically like your volleyballs, your baseballs, your soccers, your field hockeys. It's just going to be very different for your track and field athletes, even some of your swim and dive athletes. Um, so that's where I'd say the lactic is probably the least utilized, you know, energy system demand that you're going to see probably hit on most of the time. And last but not least, probably one of the more common you're going to see is that aerobic system. It's going to be long duration, steady state activity for 20 to 60 minutes. Some examples would be just, a 30-minute bike, 30-minute run at steady state, or I like to do a lot of movement circuits with our guys where you're keeping their heart rate up for an extended period of time, but you're also hitting really good movement patterns, regaining range of motion after competition while increasing the heart rate. So again, we kind of utilize all three of these. None of them are solely acting at one time. They kind of are all running. It's just whether one's prioritized or not with that training session. All right, when do we program speed training? So kind of working from the bottom up on this slide. I think the first thing you notice is going to be some of the parameters that we need to follow or that you need to really consider whenever you're covering your speed training. So are you in season versus off season? And that kind of goes with the one below it, on field demands. If you have a team that, is doing a ton of field work, they're doing a ton of base running, ton of sprinting, ton of, ball work and soccer, it might not be a smart idea to implement any sort of sprint training at that time. I think it's just analyzing your athlete, analyzing what the coach's plans are, and really develop a program from there that where you're adapting to what they're doing on the field and not expecting what they're doing on the field to adapt to you. So I think that's a big part of coaching is being adaptable, understanding where the athletes are in season versus off season, what their on field demands are, and then programming from there. Next, kind of pre-practice or post-practice. Are you going to be able to get your athletes when they're fresh? Or are you going to be able to get your athletes after they've had a 2 hour and a half, 2 hour practice? So that'll dictate, how much speed training you're able to do. And then last but not least, what is our weight room activity for that day? Is it a high CNS day? Is it a low CNS day? And really determine what you're going to do with your athletes based off a lot of what activity you're doing in the weight room that day. What are some of the qualities that we emphasize? So the big three that I'm really, really going to try to hit home with our guys is going to be number one, acceleration, number two, top end max velocity, and three, change direction. So with our acceleration work, you're going to have longer ground contact times, higher force outputs due to those longer ground contact times. It's going to be a little bit lower CNS demanding in comparison to your top end velocities. And typically, we're going to stay between, 10 and 30 yards. This is a really big one for baseball that we typically hit on a lot. Not saying that we don't hit the other two, but acceleration and moving from a static position to field a ball to steal a base is going to be really high demand in baseball. Top end velocities. So you're going to have shorter ground contact times, higher elasticity and reactivity off the ground with that stiff ankle complex. It's going to be significantly higher CNS demand than some of our acceleration work. And you're working up to, 30 to 60 yards. So secondarily, I'd say top end speed is kind of just a step or two below acceleration. But if you can raise your top end speed, you're probably going to see improvements acceleration. And kind of, not so much vice versa, where if you can accelerate at a high level, you may not see top end increases. Usually, if you see an improvement in max velocity, you'll see improvements in acceleration. And last but not least, probably one of the more important in most sports because they're not always running in a straight line is change direction. Typically, my athletes will work from really extensive, so low intensity change direction at sub-maximal percentages to, higher intensity deceleration, and teaching them to break down, change direction, and move athletically. So again, kind of how I mentioned earlier, really analyze the demand of what the athlete's having to do in their match. Don't watch the entire sport at once. Pick one athlete at one position, see how they move, see how they change direction, and really kind of program from there. And last but not least, remember they are athletes. We need them to be able to react. We need them to be able to change direction, and not necessarily just be able to run through cones in a predicted pattern. So kind of spice it up a little bit with your athletes, train reactivity, have them go from different position starts. That's some really, really good pieces for our change of direction. All right, so what is some of our warm-up demands for speed training going to look like? Without this being on video or me being in person, it is a little tricky to show some of these, but I'm sure there are things that you've probably seen, whether it's with track and field or whether it's with some of your soccer athletes, volleyball athletes, whatever they're doing, pre-sprint training. So you have your A series march, your A series 2 count, 3 count, and A series 3 hop switch. Again, Victor or myself can go over these with you at some point, but the biggest thing with all these warm up patterns that you're using is really to one, prepare the tissue you're going to train, the hip flexors, the hamstrings, the quads, the ankle complex, really train what you're going to work that day. But also, a lot of it with our athletes is they don't have tons of coordination and rhythm. All right, you want this to be a piece where you can teach the coordination, teach rhythm, teach bounce, and teach some ability to get their bodies into the right positions when they're going to sprint. And then mechanically, just kind of keep it really simple with your athletes. Majority of these kids, barring outside of track and field, are not going to have perfect mechanics. It may take years and years to get them to be able to change and look like, a high level sprinter, and it may not even ever get to that point. But teach them basic positions. So quick scissor actions of the knees is the coaching cue I'll use. A clean arm action where, the arm angle matches the opposite leg angle. A neutral pelvis where they're not in an anterior pelvic tilt leaning forward, and then foot contact below the hip. So really keep these really, really simple. Don't overdo it with your athletes that aren't specifically, trained for sprinting at, high levels. And when would should we use these? Again, pretty common sense. I think they're a great warm up for any sort of acceleration work, any sort of top end speed work, or any sort of change direction work that day. We'll even utilize them more frequently just early on so our athletes can get, used to doing them at a high level because obviously the more you do something, the more improvement you're going to see at a faster rate. So I think they're a great piece for that rhythm coordination, teaching a lot of our sprint mechanic work. Um, Secondarily, some warm-up demands for speed training. Plyometric training is a great way to get your body warmed up. Your train for any sort of speed training. What I'll try to do is match some of our plyometrics to what our demand is that day on the field. So a lot of our broad jumps, things that are going to require more ground contact time, I will utilize for acceleration, and then our bounding where you're having those faster ground contact times. You're not on the ground as much. It's more reactive. We'll use our bounding and have a little bit more of a vertical focus as opposed to a horizontal focus that we would have with our acceleration work or our broad jump work. Again, when should we use these? These can be used really anytime. I'll pair a lot of our plyometric work with some of our strength activities in the weight room, but I think if you are doing a really, really high amount of strength work that day, it can get really fatiguing to go from, a high strength exercise to a plyometric, and going back and forth can sometimes take some of the bang for your buck away from that strength movement. So a lot of times I've started implementing a lot of our plyometrics, just get them out of the way in the warm-ups, do them at a high level when the athlete's fresh, not when they're fatigued. All right, how do we program acceleration? So the thing I love about speed work is it's really easy to program, it's really easy to measure, and it's really easy to create competition and see translation to the field. So first off, we'll just go a linear volume progression with our athletes. It shows basic 3 weeks. So you go 3 by 30, that's a total of 90 yards. You go 4 by 30 yard sprint, and then a 5 by 30 yard week three. So again, that's an easy progression where you are increasing one rep each week, building up some volume at high with that acceleration speed. Uh, and again, it's as simple as that. Secondarily, you can create a linear intensity progression. So intensity increase equals an increase in velocities. So to increase in velocity, you're gradually just going to increase the distance that you're working at. So as opposed to changing, the reps like we did with our volume progression or our linear volume progression, we're just going to change the intensity we're working at from a 5 by 10 yard sprint to a 5 by 15 yard sprint to a 5 by 20 yard sprint. So again, as opposed to changing the reps, we're just changing the intensity that we're really going to train at that day. And then another thing that I've really, really started utilizing a lot is our resisted speed training. So week one, we'll go 3 by 10 yards. Week two, we'll go 3 by 10 yards. Week three, we'll go 3 by 10 yards. So the volume stays the same. But what we are going to do is add resistance and then gradually reduce resistance as we work through those 3 weeks. I'll use these early on in the fall or early on in preseason with our athletes because that's when they're going to be highest risk for hamstring injuries. So the longer ground contact times, and the lower the rate of force development, the less risk of injury we're typically going to have. So adding resistance lowers the rate of force development, which leads to, a less risk of injury. So adding the pounds, decreasing the pounds each week, working up to body weight sprinting is a great way to gradually progress our athletes with some resisted speed training. Other acceleration methods. Like I was saying, I want our athletes to be able to move from different positions, change direction easily, and really be really fluid with all the movements that they do on the field. So we'll start from positional starts is a great way to kind of break up the monotony of some of the same positions that you're always going to start in, whether it's feet square, just to kind of mix it up. So we'll go kneeling, both knees down. We'll go half kneeling, one knee up, one knee down. We'll start in a sagittal plane versus a frontal plane. So we're forcing, horizontal change direction versus sagittal plane change direction. We'll start on our bellies or on our backs, having them roll one direction or the other. And then last but not least, we'll implement partner chase drills to where they each start in a one more advantageous position than the other, and the person behind them will try to catch the person in front of them. Again, creates a ton of competition. Our athletes really enjoy it. It creates a more fun training environment, which gives you more intensity with the drill. So again, don't feel like you always just have to have the same monotonous start every single time. You can mix it up. So reactive starts have a multiple verbal stimulus. So instead of go, they're going on a clap or a different sound. So they're having to guess a little bit. You can have them multiple directional stimulus. So you can have them work to the right or work to the left, dictated based off which way you point. So they're having to guess which direction they're going. Or you can create an object pickup where they're having to pick up a tennis ball, pick up a baseball, pick up a softball, do some sort of footwork drill with a soccer ball as they go through the movement. Again, just break up the monotony, add a little bit more of a challenging stimulus, and they're having to pick something up at a high speed. And then last but not least, we will go complex and potentiation training. So we'll go isometric pushes, we'll go overloaded sleds. Like I was mentioning earlier, some of our chained sprints to body weight sprints, kind of create that post potentiation training effect that a lot of coaches utilize in the weight room. We can utilize that the same with some of our speed work, implementing with like I said, the isometrics, the overloaded sleds, or some of our chain sprints, gradually working to body weight. Next, how do we program max velocity? So first off, I'll always usually implement some sort of sprint technique with this, whether it's PVC med ball runs, mini hurdle wickets, some warm up intent focus, like I was saying with our A series, something that's going to get them focused on, the technical aspects of sprinting. And some of our common sprint errors, like I said, that posterior pelvic tilt, improper arm swing, poor head position, stiffness, not being loose and relaxed. Those are a lot of the things that we'll see with our guys. So that's what I'll really try to implement pre-max velocity training with our athletes. A lot of sprint technique and teaching them to get in the right positions at the right time. And you can also, as you'll see with the asterisk there, you can superset these with max velocity reps. So you can do, a PVC or medicine ball run. One rep, the next rep, after you've hammered home that technique, do a rep without the PVC pipe or med ball, and then alternate each. So they're getting a feel for proper sprint mechanics with the PVC pipe runs, and then going directly into, the next rep being their, max velocity rep. Like I kind of hit on earlier, just a linear volume progression. Go, 3 by 30, add 5 yards week two, 3 by 35, add 5 yards week three, 3 by 40 yards. So gradually progressing each week. And then working up in intensities. What I do with our athletes, as opposed to extending them out to, a 60-yard sprint, which is going to need a ton of rest, and then a ton of, CNS fatigue. What I'll do is do a 20-yard build up. So it allows them to build up to a high speed and then hold that highest speed for 10 yards. What I'll do the next week, increase the build up. By increasing the build up, you give them more time to get up to a higher velocity, hold that position for 10 yards. And then week three, we'll do a 30-yard build up plus 10 yards. So gradually each week, we'll increase the build up to allow them to hit a higher max velocity. And then lastly, like we kind of hit on a little bit, how do I program change direction? What are the sport demands? Watch an athlete on the field for an entire game, for 3 innings, for 45 minutes of a soccer match. Really see how they move, see what some of the demands are, and then go from there. As opposed to using cone drills, which I think cone drills can be great for, some change direction. I think having your athletes have to react to something, react to a partner, react to a coach, react to a different stimulus will create more, sport specific training, as opposed to just having to go through a cone drill, which is a learned skill. And then last thing, learn to accelerate and decelerate from various positions, learning to, decel on a staggered stance on one leg, learning to decel on a double leg stance, and just being able to teach them how to properly decelerate and accelerate. Some of the methods you'll see, like I said, cone drills, a 5-10-5 or a T drill are really, really popular. Again, simple, easy to implement, easy to measure change of direction with. So good exercise. Partner COD drills where they're having to react off a partner, and then traveling patterns where they're going through, a 10-yard back pedal to a 10-yard sprint, a 10-yard shuffle to a 10-yard sprint. Basically just having different demands and different type of patterns they're going to hit as opposed to just running in a straight line. Shuffles, back pedals, crossover runs, and changing, you know, each one moving directly into the other are great, great pieces that I use with our athletes to emulate what they're going to do on the field. And like I said, I'm always available to y'all. I know I work in a different weight room. I do come over to Shira somewhat frequently. So if you ever see me, feel free to ask some questions. If you ever want to come kind of watch what some of our baseball program does, I've told Marcy y'all are always welcome over here. Just feel free to reach out with any, sort of questions, concerns moving forward. Really good chatting. If you have any speed training questions, just feel free to reach out.